Para el primer panel del día de hoy tenemos a Guadalupe Álvarez, Jean Moreno, Mónica Marin, moderado por Mario Caro. Adelante.
Muchísimas gracias. Estoy lleno de gratitud. Quiero agradecer a nuestros anfitriones y colaboradores, a Sara, a Joe y a su fantástico equipo aquí en el Centro de León. También quiero agradecer a María Amalia por sus palabras también consideradas ayer. Estoy especialmente agradecido que empezó su ponencia reconociendo que estamos en tierra taína. Esta manera de reconocer a los habitantes originales de un lugar es un protocolo que se ha establecido en muchas partes del mundo ya. También quiero reconocer que estamos en tierra taína, pero quiero ofrecer una corrección. Cuando mi colega dice que esta tierra tan bella, en sus palabras dijo, por destino hemos heredado de nuestros taínos la tierra. Quiero que recordemos que la colonización no es cuestión del destino, sino un proceso violento y muy calculado. No más quería ofrecer eso. Ahora voy a introducir a nuestros colaboradores en este panel. Primero a Lupe Álvarez, es historiadora y crítica de arte, profesora y investigadora. Su vida profesional comenzó en el Instituto Superior de Arte de La Habana como profesora de estética y crítica de arte, desarrollando una labor académica y teórica importante en el fenómeno conocido como Nuevo Arte Cubano. Fundadora del programa de Teoría de Cultura Artística para la Facultad de Artes y Letras de la Universidad de La Habana y profesora principal de esta disciplina hasta su salida de Cuba en 1998. A su llegada a Ecuador, donde actualmente reside, se vinculó al Centro Ecuatoriano de Arte Contemporáneo, donde fungió como directora del Catálogo de Arte Contemporáneo Ecuatoriano. Fue del equipo fundador del Museo Antropológico y de Arte del Ecuador y directora de investigación para el área de arte. Fue curadora principal de esta institución, dirigiendo el equipo curatorial para la revisión histórica de las colecciones del Banco Central del Ecuador. También fungió como curadora de la Reserva de Arte Moderno y Contemporáneo del Museo Municipal de Guayaquil, trabajando en el programa de curadurías históricas de dicha institución. Ha ejercido la docencia en varias universidades del Ecuador, fundadora del Instituto Tecnológico de Artes del Ecuador, donde ocupó el cargo de directora del Departamento de Investigaciones. Ha curado múltiples exposiciones con artistas nacionales e extranjeros y colaborado con instituciones como Trama, Lugar a Dudas, Centro Cultural de España, CEASEX, MADC, Centro León, Guggenheim Museum, Colección Patricia Phelps de Cisneros, etc. Se ha desempeñado como jurado en eventos nacionales e internacionales y sus trabajos aparecen en antologías, catálogos, compilaciones y revistas varias. Fue curadora de la pasada edición del nuevo premio Mariano Aguilera y miembro del Comité Técnico y Jurado de la Bienal Internacional de Cuenca. Después de Lupe va a hablar Mónica Marin, que es, I'm going to switch now to English. This is going to be a bilingual panel. And with Jean's help, I think we can pull it off here. Mónica Marin is a curator, artist, and educator from the Virgin Islands. She has degrees in art history, theory, and criticism, and painting and drawing from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. She founded the Artist Advisory, an artist-led initiative for the Caribbean Museum Center for the Arts in 2007, and worked as the first residency coordinator for the Robert Rauschenberg residency in Captiva, Florida. She's exhibited her work in the Caribbean, the US, and Europe, and participated in such exhibitions as the International Caribbean Triennial, Santo Domingo, and Contemporary Art from the American Caribbean at the School of the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. Her work and research addresses the structural history of colonialism and the ways in which coloniality is manifested today through tourism, environmental racism, and the privatization of public land. Current projects examine the missing African Caribbean art history in the archive, and dance and vernacular cultural expressions as a space of resistance. Recent curatorial projects include Invisible Heritage, a community arts project in Frederiksted, St. Croix, collaboration with Chant, and traveling group exhibition featuring Virgin Island artists who are critically engaging the upcoming 2017 Centennial Transfer. Past projects include Migrating Histories, a two-part performance festival in collaboration with Carla Acevedo Yates at CMC Arts, The Great House, a reimaging of power, place, and history, in collaboration with Lavon Bell at Vim Great House, I think, in St. Croix. Is that poorly pronounced enough? And Paradise Lost at CMC Arts and Area Lugar in Caguas, Puerto Rico, that examined the negative impact of U.S. industrial development to both regions. She works for the Department of Public Works, the Virgin Islands Department of Public Works, on historic restoration projects that promote arts and culture, and works as an independent curator, helping to manage CMC Arts Artists in Residency Program, some of their exhibitions, and community outreach. Then Jean Moreno, who offered a nice succinct bio, is curator of programs at ICA Miami, where he founded and organizes the Art and Research Center. At ICA, he has also curated exhibitions dedicated to Elio Otisica and Terry Atkins, and is working on forthcoming projects with Larry Bell and Paulo Nazareth. He was on the advisory board of the 2017 Whitney Biennial and is an advisor for the upcoming Creative Times Summit. He serves as co-director of, what is the name? Name is the name. Name is in, are the square brackets part of the name? So I see here in square brackets name, which seems to be the name of his publication. Between 2014 and 2016, Moreno was artistic director of Cannonball, where he developed pedagogical platforms and public communications. He has contributed text to various catalogs and publications, including eFlux Journal, Kaleidoscope, and Art in America. And I'll briefly introduce myself. My name is Mario Caro. I got involved with Res Artis through my work with I got involved with Tilting Axis through my work with Res Artis. Fresh Milk was one of our members, and they were working on mapping the cultural region in the Caribbean, and we started these kinds of projects from that. I teach at MIT Contemporary Art Theory and Criticism with an emphasis on contemporary indigenous arts. So if Lupe could come.
Bueno, voy a hablar en español, mi lengua. No sabría hablar en otra con mi performatividad. Bueno, mi ponencia tiene que ver con una introducción y tres reflexiones. Voy a leerla, sé que es un poco pesado. Gracias, Mario, por la presentación tan generosa y gracias a los panelistas. En primer lugar, felicito la convocatoria 4 de Tiling Access y a sus organizadores, organizadoras, y agradezco el hospedaje siempre excelso del Centro León. Ayer escuché aquí cosas que nunca voy a olvidar, y esas voces se expanden en el caudal de afectos que esta comunidad reunida despliega. Es para mí un placer haber sido parte del equipo Curando Caribe, cogestor de este encuentro. He seguido de cerca este proyecto y a partir de mi experiencia ya larga en diferentes contextos de América Latina, siguiendo atentamente la gestión institucional de la región, sus reingenierías constantes, sus pujantes plataformas independientes que vienen a paliar la condición quebradiza y precaria que nos atraviesa, puedo afirmar que cada vez más me asombra la trayectoria certera que ha tenido Curando Caribe como programa en su empeño de crear infraestructura para la profesionalización del campo cultural, pensando una creativa e independiente gestión pedagógica, una oferta cultural posicionada en nuevos conceptos y prácticas, la proyección internacional del caudal artístico de la región desde inalienables coordenadas contextuales. Todo ello sin soslayar las dificultades de sostener en estos cauces un ejercicio crítico amplio y renovado que ubica esta geografía sociocultural en la avanzada de discusiones que, aunque arraigadas en el ámbito caribeño, ya suficientemente extenso y diverso, podrían constatar su pertinencia para territorios mucho más vastos. Número 1. Recuerdo la Bienal de La Habana de 1986. Como una intensificación de la conciencia acerca de cómo entender el concepto histórico-cultural caribe para situarnos críticamente en estas coordenadas, abundando a la ocasión en discursos cuya conflictividad se mostraba justamente en la resistencia de esta geografía cultural a pensarse en categorías obturadas. Aquellos debates no solo cifraron su potencial insurreccional en volver críticamente al punto de partida para encontrar estrategias conjuntas de producción de conocimientos que propendieran a nuevas puestas en valor de nuestras variopintas producciones culturales. Muchos de estos acervos, en los límites de las definiciones artísticas dominantes o clausurados en sus potencialidades semánticas por escleróticas folclorizaciones y autootrizaciones, carecían de aparatos conceptuales para ser pensados en el presente, vivos en los modos de vida contemporáneos y con identidades cambiantes. Tampoco eran valorados en tanto emporios de complejas y dinámicas estructuras sensibles o desde la activación de sus sentidos en prácticas artísticas contemporáneas que aportaban sesgos genuinos a los procesos de identidad siempre en tránsito. Fueron tiempos que nos enseñaron a mirar esos legados y a dinamitar jerarquías entre medios culturales, a entender prácticas artísticas que ponían en el crisol con naturalidad complejos procesos de traducción. El resultado fue el desafío de poner a dialogar esos patrimonios, encontrar en el espacio instituido un lugar para confrontar los nichos epistemológicos en los que se asentaban el saber sobre esas producciones simbólicas, articulando estrategias perturbadoras de visibilidad y coexistencia. El reto, tratar con la inclusión, descubrir esas zonas donde la colonialidad de nuestra mirada, nuestro saber y nuestros afectos crearon jerarquías, sembraron exclusiones y marcaron distancias. Este giro acarreaba un enorme impulso archivístico, una importante transformación de la academia de cara a nuevos campos de estudio básicamente transdisciplinares y una mutación radical de la actividad institucional con los museos a la cabeza, urgidos en revisar sus prácticas de coleccionismo y exhibición, sus conceptos de patrimonio, el rol de la documentación, sus protocolos y los fundamentos de su papel como entidad educativa y formadora de públicos. Había que examinar, en general, el sentido mismo de las colecciones, concibiendo estrategias de creación de infraestructura para estos cambios. La gestión del museo poseedor de patrimonio se había transformado radicalmente con la emergencia de nuevas narrativas históricas que, asistidas por remozadas puestas en valor de los fenómenos culturales, marchaban de la mano de las críticas al eurocentrismo y del acervo interpelante de los estudios culturales, del giro decolonial, de las pedagogías críticas, del feminismo, la teoría queer y sobre todo de los conocimientos producidos al fragor de los movimientos sociales. La tarea está en pie, con un vigor inusitado e ingentes aparatos de conocimiento que aportan miradas transversales a la producción simbólica y distancia crítica hacia los saberes que constituyeron el discurso dominante acerca del arte. Pero todo este capital intelectual y los esfuerzos de catalizar una transformación estructural de nuestras instituciones, museos, aunque tengan logros visibles en algunos contextos, requieren el debate constante de los modos en los que se fundan y en cómo performan los significados que están proponiendo. 2. Hace 19 años dirigí un proceso destinado a poner en escena las colecciones del Banco Central del Ecuador, entidad que atesoró y arbitró el mayor patrimonio cultural de la nación hasta la fundación reciente del Ministerio de Cultura. El trabajo encomendado venía en el paquete de un nuevo museo, una estructura arquitectónica ambiciosa, deudora. Esta cita me gusta siempre ponerla en este trabajo que se llama, en general son varios trabajos, disculpen, que se llama Por una cultura de los antecedentes. Y pongo esta cita, que no está en parte de la ponencia, porque me gusta lo que moviliza. La convocatoria, hace 19 años, dirigí un proceso de reingeniería de la institución museo en Guayaquil, ciudad del manso Guayas y enclave urbano que Humboldt declaró último puerto del Caribe. La convocatoria estaba destinada a poner en escena las colecciones del Banco Central del Ecuador. El trabajo encomendado venía en el paquete, disculpen que había leído, de un nuevo museo, una estructura arquitectónica ambiciosa, deudora del efecto Guggenheim de Bilbao e inscrita en un políticamente conflictivo proceso de regeneración urbana. De por sí, la construcción del museo, ustedes lo ven ahí, produjo bastante crítica en relación con la prioridad que se le dio a la escritura promocional de una alcaldía impugnada. También por la servidumbre del proyecto arquitectónico a un modelo impostado de ciudad, cuyo plan, identificado con estrategias de limpieza sociológica, se alzó sobre otras consideraciones como la peligrosidad de la locación para las reservas en términos climáticos y sus connotaciones geopolíticas. Sin embargo, desde el punto de vista museológico, el concepto rector del proyecto no solo estipulaba una muestra específica, abarcaba todo un perfil para la institución, comprometiendo un fundamentado programa de inserción en la esfera pública, estrategias de vínculos con el sector privado, lo mismo en temas de coleccionismo, en apoyo a la gestión y producción de obras al interior de proyectos específicos, programas de difusión pública de las plataformas conceptuales desde las que operaba la nueva institución con el objetivo de abrir puertas a nuevas formas de consumo cultural. En fin, un proyecto global de reformulación que abarcaba las colecciones de arte moderno, de arqueología, la más importante del país, prolijos archivos fotográficos y cuantiosos fondos documentales. En suma, un patrimonio cuantioso e invaluable que se había mantenido o bien compartimentado, siguiendo las consabidas categorizaciones de la mirada patrimonialista, eurocéntrica, o sencillamente sin recibir el tratamiento que convertiría a esos acervos en producciones significativas, capaces de alumbrar complejas representaciones de una vasta y conflictiva experiencia cultural. Umbrales del arte en el Ecuador, una mirada a los procesos de nuestra modernidad estética, así se llamó la muestra, movilizó 604 bienes culturales de más de 80 colecciones públicas y privadas del país, un despliegue sin precedentes de gestión que venía a posicionar métodos de trabajo tácitamente opuestos a los naturalizados manejos domésticos y precarios de las colecciones. La experiencia era suficientemente enriquecedora como para dibujar un perfil del campo cultural que bajaba el tono a prácticas museales pictocéntricas, a relatos cronológicos basados en hitos estéticos jamás sometidos a escrutinio, y a divisiones escudadas en conceptos anquilosados y coloniales, que afirmaban la idea de una modernidad epigónica sin sesgos problemáticos ni representaciones cuestionables. Como proyecto, el museo, además de las direcciones de arte y arqueología, dado el carácter de los fondos, comprendía un área de antropología visual y otra de estudios urbanos, de modo que los proyectos específicos estados en cada predio fueran capaces de perfilarse al fragor de la discusión multidisciplinar, una oportunidad de generar conocimientos y de pulir marcos conceptuales metodológicamente abiertos que fundamentaran vínculos plausibles y coherentes de bienes y fuentes diversas. En Ecuador, la institución museo en general vivía un importante vacío de legitimidad, sin políticas de adquisición ni equipos de investigación, sin proyección razonada de las colecciones, con escasos estudios de la actividad como tal de los museos y sistematizaciones aisladas de los fondos guardados en las reservas, precisaba un proceso de reingeniería institucional que muy tímidamente, 20 años después, se ha puesto en marcha. En los 90, la crítica a las exposiciones concebidas como narrativas de la nación, que construían la mirada a los procesos identitarios, era nula. No existía identidad intelectual para la curaduría, y menos una identidad profesional para el curador, que era percibida como una figura de poder que le discutía el lugar sagrado al artista y ponía a las obras en una mirada intelectual que restaba luminosidad a la expresión individual y a la suficiencia estética. No es extraño que el proyecto de Marras haya encontrado una resistencia en muchos círculos intelectuales. De hecho, la discusión en torno al mismo copó polarizando la escena y contribuyendo a que parte de la misma modificara sus posiciones. Generó muchas expectativas y sacó a la luz todo un arsenal de prejuicios en los modos de ver el arte y de concebir los museos que marcaron agenda. Uno de los enfoques punteros fue la concepción del enunciado museológico en relación con el espacio físico. Este es el espacio del lobby. Ustedes pueden ver ahí las 4 puertas que conforman. Nosotros aprovechamos las 4 puertas para concebir el término metafórico de umbrales como una metáfora que a la vez tiene una dimensión epistemológica, que es lo que está a la sombra, lo que entra y alberga, lo que permite una entrada a lo desconocido. Los umbrales, pensados en dimensión a la vez metafórica y epistemológica, tuvieron una resolución espacial. El espectador podía elegir su entrada, seguir un tópico y encontrar núcleos diversos en los que podía encontrar relaciones iluminadoras. Aquí tienen una visión esquemática de la maqueta. La construcción del espacio de lo moderno, rutas críticas del arte, búsquedas y aperturas estéticas, los conflictos del sujeto moderno, entre otros tópicos que conformaban curadurías dentro de la matriz curatorial, eran temáticas que orbitaban en torno a un gran plan. Su propósito, despejar la lectura occidentocentrista impuesta a las modernidades periféricas, cuya aplicación mecánica propicia una imagen empobrecida de los procesos artísticos que tienen lugar en condiciones sociales y culturales incompatibles con los cauces maestros de la modernidad occidental. En consecuencia, la exhibición priorizaba significados específicos de construcción de la modernidad en América Latina, abordando circunstancias y contingencias que iluminaban el valor de los bienes en relación con el contexto en el que esos contenidos y búsquedas poseían sentido. Más que atender a una lógica estética, La estructura propuso una lógica del campo cultural de cuyas condiciones depende el valor de unas u otras orientaciones expresivas. Este enfoque también apuntaba a modos de narrar que discuten la representación totalizadora de los desarrollos artísticos. Apostaba por significados contingentes de los procesos a los que alude, proponiéndolos en sus límites y problematicidad intrínseca. Parte del mundo del arte incluso consideró peligroso el enunciado curatorial. Se había suprimido la idea de una representación nacional, todavía hoy recurrido y posicionado. Ni siquiera se manejaba el término de muestra permanente. Se trataba de interpelar los roles tradicionales del museo en el país. La propuesta no solo revisaba los modos de tratar con el patrimonio de arte moderno del Banco Central, sino que conectaba este legado con colecciones y archivos que reiteradamente habían sido marginados del ámbito museal. Por ejemplo, el cine, la caricatura, la fotografía, los mapas, los documentos etnográficos. Además de priorizar una visión problematizadora del campo estético moderno, la muestra se autoafirmaba como un esfuerzo por legitimar el ejercicio curatorial y la investigación en este campo. También pudiera ser comprendida como un espacio crítico con los propios consumos museales de la modernidad que han orientado la recepción del arte hacia una sobrevaloración del objeto y de su creador en detrimento de los significados que las obras tienen para un contexto dado. Puede decirse que como muestra, Umbrales ahuyentó cualquier idea extendida sobre la neutralidad del discurso expositivo y enrumbó la mirada escrutadora hacia aquello que el museo legitima e instituye como valor. De ella, el crítico y curador Rodolfo Kronfle señalaba en la prensa entonces: veo Umbrales como una conjunción de muchas microcuradurías que orbitan alrededor de un gran plan, cada una de ellas tremendamente flexible en cuanto a su potencial expansión física y en cuanto a las sucesivas sugerencias que una mente inquieta puede hacer brotar para trazar nuevos caminos de recorrido y para intercambiar los lentes desde las cuales se pueden enfocar variantes de estas agrupaciones de obras que muestren otros aspectos de interés sobre ellas mismas. En este sentido, decía Kronfle, Umbrales es una muestra generosa, que puede crecer como una célula que se multiplica, brinda las suficientes herramientas históricos contextuales al espectador involucrado para que éste logre un entendimiento de lo que los impulsos artísticos nacen y toman cuerpo por un sinfín de motivaciones y circunstancias, la mayor de las veces atadas a la historia y a la vida misma. Nosotros tratábamos de hacer fundamentalmente que la experiencia cultural del espectador, aquello que habían conocido de una manera parcial, sesgada o confrontada, en este caso, con los relatos de viaje, con las crónicas de las colonias, con los archivos que guardaban, digamos, las familias más importantes, las familias, los gentilicios ordenados. Dice un sociólogo que Ecuador es un país de reinos, porque mantiene en cierta medida ciertos órdenes feudales. La muestra en cuestión tenía caricatura, arte público, cine, libros, ilustración, o sea, un sinnúmero de bienes puestos en relación para alumbrar precisamente esas relaciones entre el arte y la experiencia social del espectador. Número 3. El sueño del nuevo museo sucumbió a vaivenes políticos. Qué raro. La pretenciosa edificación siguió el camino de tantos proyectos de infraestructura que en cualquiera de nuestros predios de vino en cascarón que sus autoridades de turno prestan, lo mismo a la Feria del Libro, al lanzamiento de un producto nuevo de atún real o a una muestra de arte en chocolate. De vez en cuando, alguna exhibición interesante ocupa sus salas deterioradas por las faltas de requerimientos técnicos. Cae en paracaídas huérfana de plataformas que potencia su diferencia y expanda sus logros. La transformación de las prácticas museales sigue perteneciendo al horizonte utópico, aun cuando la escena, fortalecida académicamente y con actores emergentes, ha crecido e impulsado proyectos que definitivamente se inscriben en otros códigos. La inclusión sigue siendo un foco delirante de conflictividad. No basta con incorporar contenidos. Se hablaba ayer de la incorporación de comunidades. En Ecuador, 40 y tantas nacionalidades indígenas, algunas de ellas ni siquiera conocen el concepto de museo, no lo tienen en su lengua. La manera de entender sus representaciones es una manera absolutamente deslindada de los procesos autonómicos del arte occidental, y evidentemente esas producciones puestas a dialogar con las otras requieren discusiones, debates y términos particulares. En la musealidad, y ya termino, el diálogo intercultural sigue siendo un planteamiento que obliga a una reingeniería de las propias construcciones acerca de la artisticidad, y su propuesta viable necesita ensayar nuevos modelos de participación que intercepten las presuposiciones que la práctica curatorial incluso muchas veces establece. Nos hemos llenado de retóricas bien pensantes, que suenan muy bien en los discursos, pero en los soportes sensibles se pierden sus resonancias y los enunciados suenan a demagogia. De hecho, viniendo para acá, en Quito se inauguraba el Museo Nacional. Imagínense ustedes. Aún no veo su propuesta, pero los comentarios vuelan. Y las imágenes, estas son todavía de la muestra Umbrales. Estas son todavía de la muestra Umbrales. Esta es de la muestra nueva del MUNA, del Museo Nacional. Digo que aún no veo su propuesta, pero los comentarios vuelan y las imágenes hablan. Muchas gracias.
Where's the little clicker? Did you take it with you? Thank you. Okay. Good afternoon. It's great to be here. First and foremost, thank you so much, Tilting Access, everybody, for organizing this wonderful gathering. Mario, thank you so much. I've been a cultural instigator for the past 20 years in the Virgin Islands, where I was born and grew up. Today, I'm going to talk about some of my projects and cultural spaces on the islands of St. Croix. Slide 1. The first slide that you're seeing here is one of the spaces, the Caribbean Museum Center for the Arts. CMC Arts was founded by Candia Atwater in 1994 as a means of addressing the increase in violence afflicting the youth on St. Croix. Today, it serves many purposes for many people, and it's comprised of a all volunteer-run organization with 7 board members and only 1 paid staff person who's our gift shop worker. The board president acts as a de facto museum center director and is in charge of curating, grant writing, managing the day-to-day operations, programs, and among many other things. Essentially, this means our working board is constantly putting out fires instead of playing the vital role of fundraising and organizational stewardship. In the Virgin Islands, as Priscilla and David mentioned yesterday, we don't have a national museum. There's no gallery system, there's no collectors, very, very, very few. Very minimal art programming in the public schools. It's been increasingly scaled back every year. The market is tourist-driven. There's limited understanding of and appreciation for contemporary art. What we do have is an extremely rich and vibrant vernacular tradition of cultural art forms, which have been passed down from generation to generation. Many of these cultural art forms are performance-based, You may have heard of Bambula dance, carousel, and Quelbe music, masquerade, and storytelling that all embody the powerful stories of resistance. Sadly, despite this rich tradition, the Virgin Islands does not have a real Department of Culture. We only have a small group, the Virgin Islands Council of the Arts, which gets us a very tiny pot of money from the National Endowment for the Arts, which we all kind of have to compete for. So this lack of government funding and support has most certainly created an ambiguous identity for CMC Arts. We are constantly adding new programs for our community in order to stay relevant and to survive. Now, as a result of the devastating hurricane season of 2017, we know we have to reinvent how we serve St. Croix. One possibility would be to apply for hazard mitigation money that would allow for us to function as a community shelter for future disasters. There's other things too, but for now, I'm gonna share with you some of the projects that I've curated first. Yes, I'm sorry. My experience within this institution, where I've been volunteering on and off since 2004, has been to curate shows and performance festivals, run an artist-run initiative, the Artist Advisory, and develop meaningful educational initiatives, public programs, and an artist in residency. Many projects go outside the confines of the museum and into public spaces, and as much of my work addresses institutional critique. I also have created community development and creative placemaking projects in partnership with other local nonprofits, such as CHANT, the Cultural Nature Tourism Organization, other curators, artists, historians, and scholars. I thrive off collaboration and interdisciplinary approaches. The underlying role of my curatorial practice is to bring socially engaged artists and other critical thinkers together around important social justice issues. This work is usually grounded in the local dynamics. Slide 2. Let's see. This features Paradise Lost. This is a show that I curated that involved artists from both Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. It was at the Caribbean Museum Center, and it traveled to Aria Lugar in Caguas, Puerto Rico, and it basically addressed, I grew up on the south shore of the island, which was its industrial zone, and we, on St. Croix, we used to have the second largest oil refinery in the Western Hemisphere. We're exempt from the Clean Water Act. We had one of the largest oil spills in America underground that polluted our aquifer. We had an aluminum plant that disposed all the bauxite right into the ocean. We have rum factories, headquarter of Captain Morgan, as well as Crucian Rum, which is a local rum distillery. So basically, I watched the whole landscape kind of deteriorate before me, and it really, kind of inspired me and this work. So this traveling show kind of addresses our shared coloniality as it relates specifically to the natural environment. How historically the relationship between man and the natural environment has been one of possession and of sacred, protected, and of control. And how this translates today to land grabs, the privatization of sacred, protected land by outside developers, tourism, and environmental racism. For example, the fact that the US oil companies pollute our aquifers, as I just mentioned. The image on the right is by Jason Mena and translates to "They are all lies." This is part of he staged several interventions with billboards and even took over a Bacardi festival. The one on the left is by Crucian Rican artist Johanna Bermudez Ruiz. It's a still from her documentary, Vieques Forging Futures, in which she documents the civil protests by activists in Vieques who were fighting back against the US naval bombing and the consequent health crisis that led to multiple forced migration waves from families from Vieques to St. Croix. Slide 3 is a project that I worked on with Levon Bell at Wim Great House, and we did this in 2011. This is where we staged several interventions to challenge the one-sided colonial perspective of how our Virgin Islands history was being presented by the museum. Before this show, there was little to no examples of empowerment or resistance. It was part of this institutional critique that I first began to examine the missing links in the archive and how Virgin Islands vernacular cultural expressions fill in these blind spots. The image on the right was one of my favorite projects that I worked on with performance artist Oshana James, who's a longtime collaborator of mine. And she activates the space by dancing the bambula, a sacred dance of resistance used to protest and organize without the slave master knowing. This, again, is Oshana, and this depicts a multiple series of basically performance-based festivals that I co-curated and conceived with Carla Acevedo Yates from Puerto Rico. I know that last year she spoke about this work, so I don't want to get too in-depth in detail, but I do want to just kind of make the links because it's important because it kind of feeds into other work. The main inspiration for this series was the body as a site of resistance and how this is manifested today in such improvisational art forms as movement. This is inside the gallery at CMC Arts, and this is Oshana James performing Fergawi the Deceitful Fellow, an excerpt that then turned into a larger full play that we showed. This examines the institutional racism of our society through the cosmic dialogue of a haunted Caribbean woman and a young man claiming his identity. It is a powerful piece that links characters from the plantation era, enslaved men and women, to today's maroons, or unarmed black men and women running away from the police. In all, her work addresses the bodily traumas of the transatlantic slave trade and how these traumas are inherited and felt in the body. The next image is Paloma McGregor with Oshana, and in this piece, they collaborated on, this is her durational, this is an iteration of her durational performance, Building a Better Fish Trap. In this one, she starts on her family's property and activates the space. And then she then basically did like an interactive community walk that ended up in the wharf, Gallows Bay Wharf, where her father, who's now 90 years old, used to build his fish traps, which is a dying tradition. A lot of her work is about memory and tradition, and this project was really great. This was the second part of Migrating Histories because they did a lot of programming with young people around family tradition and art workshops with movement, and also making these like memory glass, like bottles, kind of like that she used in the performance. We also had Bomba and Bambula by a local dance troupe and a drumming circle. That was one of the nights. We also filmed Johanna Bermudez's film. What is it called? Oh, I'm sorry, I can't think of it right now. Okay, slide 6 is Invisible Heritage. And this depicts a residency and community engagement project that I developed and worked on with Public Arts Administrator Kendall Henry. He's raised in St. Croix, but he currently runs New York City's Department of Cultural Affairs 1% Art Fund. He presented on public art and how it can revitalize neighborhoods, and we met with the local policymakers, such as Senator Jackson, who's working on a bill for the Virgin Islands so that we can implement this program. This is Oshana performing the full length of Fergawi, the Deceitful Fellow, as part of Take 5, which was co-curated with Carla, and also another collaborator, the producer Elena Simone Enterprises from New York. This time we featured it, and it was a street play. And then we were able to me and Oshana took this to Denmark, and we did it inside of the Royal Library as part of the Unfinished Conference. This is this was screenings of Jeanette Ellers. And this also was with Carla and Elena, and this is where we presented her work outside the National Monument at Fort Christiansvern. This is important in context to Take 5 because it represents a critical voice of the African diaspora living in Europe. This is the art exhibition, the group show Invisible Heritage, which inspired the larger community development project. And it features work from artists from the Virgin Islands who were kind of critically engaging the centennial. As Priscilla and David mentioned, the centennial was our 100-year anniversary of being sold from the US, from Denmark to the US. And it's not something really to celebrate because the people of the Virgin Islands, the local African Caribbean people, didn't really have a say. And it just wasn't really, it kind of was something that we wanted to interrogate. So the artists from the region, all 3 islands, kind of took back that narrative and flipped it and twisted it up and did all types of things. The poster on the bottom right is Janet Cook-Rutnick, an artist from St. John. The one on the right is from Gerbio Larson, and then this is Culture Shock, a series called Culture Shock from David Berg. 11. The next project began in 2014 and was inspired by my government job in which I write grants to fund historic restoration projects. One of my approaches was to utilize arts and culture to solve this problem. This led to the Invisible Heritage Community Art Project, developed in collaboration with Chant. Specifically, my collaborator, Chant's executive director, Frandel Gerard, who has served to be a true mentor to me. We were awarded funding by ArtPlace from 2017 through 2019, as well as an NEA Art Town grant, among others. The project's growing, and hopefully this will be something that will be permanent. The Free Gut Building Art School employs young artisans taught by a master artisan the traditional woodworking and carpentry skills so that they're able to help with the restoration efforts of our historic built heritage. This is part of a move to develop a local artisan culture. And it's important because it activates the Free Gut neighborhood, which is where our African Caribbean artisans who built our towns, who were largely free blacks that bought their freedom, lived, built their homes, and some of the most beautiful vernacular architecture exists there. There's 4 buildings that we are gonna lease, and these young guys are learning the skills so that they can help with that effort. Briefly, before I conclude, I want to return to our panel's subject. To utilize the institution as a platform, or in this case of our Invisible Heritage and Free Gut Building Art School, to build a completely new institution that would support this type of sustainable community development. Also one that was on our terms, from local Virgin Islanders and not people from the outside, such as Denmark and the US, who are in essence our colonizers. I'm working on another project as a side note for my government job, which is also a building art school to building arts and architecture school. And it's a collaboration with the foundation in Denmark, BIFO, the Historic Preservation of Houses is their foundation. And they've shown a great interest, and they are fundraising $10 million, and we have to come up with a matching $10 million. And it's a collaboration also with Aarhus School of Architecture and the Danish Royal Academy School of Architecture. So we brought their students, they did all of our original kind of site drawings and schematic drawings, and now we're trying to find the funding. It's kind of a reparations project, but they don't want to talk about it like that. And we weren't going to wait, so we did this as a feeder school for that program. And it's important because this is actually in Frederiksted, and Frederiksted had been left out of this other project. The other historic towns, the one in Charlotte Amalie, where they're doing a whole arts corridor. We don't have a national museum, so this would, I guess, be our new national museum. It's supposed to be a partnership with the Smithsonian. And it's part of Senator Jackson, who I mentioned, his In Search of Identity project. And it would be a whole arts corridor. And then in St. Croix, activating an old barracks building, an old Army barracks building. And then the same thing on St. Croix, an old barracks building that is now our educational building that would be restored and turned into this architecture program. So it's important to kind of talk about these together because they're sister projects. We got this grant first, and we're hoping that they will take some leads from us and realize that this needs to be organic and it has to come from the locals. So anyways, I'll keep you guys updated on that. And that's pretty much it. Wait, I've got one more little side note. Also, okay, so the one thing that I do need to mention is that this is preserving the historically Black neighborhood of Freegut, which I mentioned already. The VI does not have a comprehensive land use plan, and we need to develop a sustainable strategy to prevent land grabs and the displacement of local residents in our historic towns and neighborhoods. My partners are strategically working on developing land trusts, such as for this project, so as to protect these properties for the local Crucian families that have lived here for generations. Also to push back against the gentrification that's coming in hardcore as a result of the hurricane and the man-made disaster capitalism. The fact that many families cannot afford to fix their properties because they had no insurance is creating a buyer's market. We want to make sure that arts, culture, and heritage are at the forefront center of our city planning as we embark on our major rebuild efforts. We know now more than ever that we need to keep our eyes open to the bad deals happening by outsiders profiting off of our loss. One of the programs that I already mentioned, it was with Senator Jackson setting up a 1% art fund for the territory, which would allocate major funding. Right now, Bloomberg is going to have already invested $330 million in the territory when it's all said and done. We're getting millions of federal dollars, and it's really important that we get this funding in place and we get it allocated, and that it's not just for public art, it needs to be community arts projects and community development projects. 1% of all construction on all of the new infrastructure, major infrastructure and capital improvement projects would be set aside for these types of projects. So I'm hoping to collaborate with David and Priscilla and Chant and all of us kind of community builders in the Virgin Islands to push this agenda forward. We also want to make sure that our local artisans are equipped with the knowledge and skills to be the ones responsible for restoring the built heritage, and so that they'll be a part of the rebuild. And that was why, obviously, the Building Art School is important. This summer, I think I'm almost, that's it. That was the last slide. This summer, I'm just going to finish. We've got 2 summer programs going on. At CMC Arts, I'm bringing Ken Kraftcheck, who's a social artist who started MICA's community arts program. He's going to be doing a second year of printmaking workshops and public art projects with local youth from Boys and Girls Club. He also is going to be working and engaging with our students at the Freegut, the Invisible Heritage Summer Program. We also have a leader in social justice who's doing workshops with the youth, and we have a group of curators from Denmark that we've been collaborating with who curated the Blind Spots exhibit, and that we participated, Priscilla, David, all of us, and Oshana in Denmark, and it's kind of a larger decolonizing the archive project. So they've got pictures from Freegut neighborhood, and they're going to be working with the students, and the students are going to be activating those histories and creating artwork around that. I'm hoping that these different ways of collaborating will keep informing my practice while helping me to organize artists around projects that work towards solving important challenges in our community. Thank you so much.
So, good afternoon. First of all, thank you to Tilting Axis for bringing us here, for the invitation, to our hosts, to Mario for the invitation to be in the panel. So I'm just going to riff on some images. It's going to be quite descriptive, and then we can talk during the talk a little bit deeper. So this is great. So when I transferred out of my Keynote into PowerPoint, this image got blurry, and I thought, I should fix this, but I thought, no, maybe this is right? This is the visual metaphor that should kind of guide us, because it's a time of kind of undoing, right? It's a time of destitution, right? Of destitutive powers as opposed to constitutive powers, right? We need to undo these identities, these institutional identities that we've inherited, and figure out. So yeah. So that being said, that's me. Okay, so no images. Okay, so this is our excessively photogenic building. What this image hides, I think, is 3 qualities you should know about it. This building sits on Tequestan Seminole land. It lives in a city that was built by Bahamian and Black labor, and it was born obsessed with Chelsea and Berlin. And so yesterday we talked about equilibrium, and equilibrium is also a place where hierarchies are built. So I think one of our jobs has to be to pull things far from equilibrium and readjust those hierarchies, yeah? And so I think in relation to what we're doing here today, the way I think at the ICA we've been thinking how to engage our region is the way the city was built around Bahamian and Black labor. I think this is our porous kind of initial ligament that we should kind of exacerbate. So I think we're at the point where blues epistemology from the Mississippi Delta has to meet the poetics of relations, right? Has to meet glissant. This is the place, and I think this is how we're trying to do it. So we're testing the theory that the world of cotton and the world of sugar can be thought through Miami in some way. Yeah, these are both worlds that come from plantation economies and plantation capitalism. So this is the way, a place to start thinking. And so the way we kind of try to do these things is with some exhibitions, things like this. So this is the first posthumous survey of Terry Atkins. And it was really important to do this particular series. This is Zora Neale Hurston, his homage to Zora Neale Hurston. And he decided to use her book called Tell My Horse, which is her only book dedicated to Jamaica and Haiti. And this is the cover of the 1981 printing of that book. So this is a way to kind of think, how do we think Black American thought in the Caribbean? And I think one of the ways is things like this, right? So if you think of this, you think of Haiti, you think of the Haitian Revolution, then you have to think of Zora Neale Hurston in relation to Eatonville, right? The first self-governing all-Black municipality in the United States after the Civil War, right? This is where she lived her whole life. So this is how we're kind of trying to think these things. So Terry Atkins, this is an homage to Bessie Smith, blues singer, Mississippi Delta. This is his work dedicated to abolitionist John Brown. We had an opportunity to do a show on Elio Itisika, and there was a retrospective kind of floating around. So in order to not be redundant, we kind of thought of what part of that body of work was a bit underserved by that retrospective, and we decided that the Bolides were the least served body of work. And it's quite curious because it is also quite the first body of work where actually viewer participation becomes a physical activity as opposed to a perceptual one. So I think it's a body of work that complicates quite a bit his reading in North American institutions as this phenomenological, intense color guy. So we decided to do a very kind of focused show on this. Tom El Said Thomas Said is a Haitian-born, Miami-based painter of Palestinian and Israeli parents. So yeah, so this is Tom. And this is a show we're doing next summer with Paula Nazareth, so Brazilian artist. The other thing we do is commissions and projects. So we have a sculpture garden in our building. It's 15,000 square feet. So we use it as a commissioning space. So we did Abigail DeVille. Ayoran Calzadilla. So public programs, which is kind of what I was hired to do. But we're a team of 3, so we all do everything. But what we tried to do with public programs is when I got to the institution, it was quite dependent on exhibitions. So you brought like an art historian to speak about the show, or you brought the artist to speak about their show. And so we're trying to think of this as a more global possibility with some autonomy. So what we started doing is things like this, yeah? So this kind of touches on multiple exhibitions at the same time rather than being quite directly dependent on the exhibition, yeah? And then we do things like this. So this is our upcoming symposium. We're trying to think of what does it mean to talk about Black queerness audiovisuals as opposed to cinema, which is kind of the general organizing framework of these things. So we have folks coming who are going to speak about Black queerness in video games and Black queerness in memes and music videos and that sort of thing. Arthur Jafa screening. And then we're going to close the cycle with the Frantz Fanon symposium at the end of September. So the Art and Research Center, it's kind of so if the public programs still have to address exhibitions some way, we thought, how do we address just the contemporary conditions of cultural production without necessarily addressing the art objects again? So we came up with this kind of Art and Research Center. So our first year, so we create like a research line for the year. Our first year, we called it New Social Abstractions. And we're thinking, how do you function in a world where kind of, finance and debt kind of organize your life, yeah? Kind of these abstract forces constantly organize our lives. And so we just kind of brought artists who are kind of thinking of this and theorists who are thinking about this. So Ito came and just different people. And so our second year, we did this thing called Relay Subjectivities was our research initiative. And it was building on the first year. If it's true that our life is kind of guided by finance and debt and these things, it's also true that these things like fuck up our lives on an everyday basis, right? So debt is this weird kind of mining of your future, but it's also kind of the bill you get in the mail. Yeah, so we live in this kind of relay switch moment. And what does that do to kind of subjectivity, right? How do you function in a world that abstraction both organizes your life, but you have to function and deal with this domination, this resistance on an everyday level? So our second line was relay subjectivities. This is Jermaine Barnes. Jermaine Barnes is an architect who thought, as architects often do, he can come into a city and project all his ideas, and he quickly learned that that's not how it works. So over 5 years, he's had to like rebuild an entire project to rejuvenate, let's say, the city called Opa-locka, which is in North Miami. And he learned quickly that communities know what they want. And the last thing we do as part of the research center is the summer intensive. And so the summer intensive is always based on climate and culture production. And this is something I said somewhere, which I think it explains what. So I can read it for the translators, yeah? So aside from everything else that it represents at the moment, the problem of climate is also a crisis for cultural institutions. These institutions, when driven by a critical imperative, have historically and consistently focused on social problems. The disenfranchisement of certain communities, the use of culture to perpetuate the interests of affluent classes, the commercialization of everything, etc. By contrast, the problem of climate, where social history and natural history collapse into one another, has been a difficult phenomenon for these institutions to broach effectively. Most efforts have remained at the level of symbolic production, producing images of disaster and or entreating us to sense the changes that are visiting Earth systems. One wonders if this is sufficient, if new and different modes of institutional production don't need to be urgently invented. And so this is kind of the things we bring. We try to bring indigenous folks to kind of teach us a little bit of how to do this. So this is Houston Cypress, a Miccosukee activist. And what's great about working with these folks is that then they take us to their land and they teach us how to engage this. Yeah. And that's it. Yeah.
Gracias. Thank you. So I don't know how much time we have, timekeepers, lords of the program. But we're going to take probably more time than is scheduled because I think we started a little later. Anyway, I just want to open it up, a couple of questions maybe, and then the main impetus for this, for us, was to try to have a conversation about these issues because I think many of us are inculcated in institutions in one way or another. So I think this is there's a bit of relevance throughout the room here. Voy a empezar con una pregunta o relacionada al tema de Lupe, ¿no? Terminaste tu presentación con lo siguiente. Nos hemos llenado de retóricas bien pensantes que suenan muy bien en los discursos, pero en los soportes sensibles se pierden sus resonancias y los enunciados suenan a demagogia, ¿no? Un poquito pesimista puede ser, ¿no? Pero también muy realístico, ¿no? Y para mí eso es el problema, ¿no? Se lee mucho de la crítica, de la institutional critique, ¿no? La crítica de la crítica institucional. Pero siempre se tiene que actuar, siempre se tiene que mover y hacer algo, ¿no? ¿Cómo involucrarse en sistemas que son como más grandes de lo local para poder, ¿no? Percibir, para poder salir de este problemita, ¿no? de la coopción?
Bueno, yo creo que hoy en día es bien sabido que nada está fuera de las instituciones, o sea, la crítica está instituida, los discursos académicos de la resistencia están instituidos dentro de sistemas de academia que son totalmente neoliberales en su funcionamiento. O sea, verdaderamente, y esto es un tema realmente delirante que me encantaría tener más oportunidad con todos ustedes que tienen experiencias tan interesantes de conversar. Realmente, y ya se habla mucho de la crítica post-institucional precisamente por esa idea de que no tenemos ya ninguna necesidad. Esto en la academia más mainstream, ¿no? Que no tenemos ya necesidad de criticar instituciones consolidadas de la modernidad porque el neoliberalismo se ha encargado de ablandar las plataformas institucionales a partir de quitarle los recursos, de valorar, digamos, de ponerlas en función del turismo cultural. Pero yo creo que en nuestros contextos, reubicándonos otra vez en nuestras geografías, en nuestros contextos las instituciones culturales juegan un styling axis, o sea, es como una oscilación entre al mismo tiempo un vacío de legitimidad y al mismo tiempo una necesidad y una credibilidad, porque las personas todavía quieren tener los museos, quieren ir a los museos, quieren tener centros culturales, quieren tener programas que satisfagan ofertas culturales. Entonces yo, que no tengo obviamente la solución de esto, creo que esto es una conversación permanente, colectiva, de escucha, de atención y de ver, leer. Por eso yo insisto tanto en este trabajo últimamente por una cultura de los antecedentes, porque creo que hay que recuperar en esos archivos escondidos de prácticas que no han tenido visibilidad, esos nichos pequeños de resistencia donde podemos avistar de que algo se ha hecho. Y de pronto reuniendo, como decíamos ayer en la mesa, un gran folder, un gran catálogo, una gran inscripción discursiva, perdonen el término académico, de estas prácticas, podríamos ponerlas al lado de las nuestras, verlas ingresadas en nuestras experiencias, analizar resonancias. Porque yo creo que no se ha resuelto discursivamente, o sea, académicamente, ni tampoco se ha resuelto prácticamente. Hay muchas experiencias y esas experiencias tienen que unirse, tienen que formar un gran expediente histórico. Siempre vuelvo al texto fundacional de Justo Pastor Mellado de la creación de infraestructura, el curador como creador de infraestructura, encontrando en los archivos, en las academias, o sea, en general academia, porque también necesitamos otras mentalidades, discutir, refrescar marcos conceptuales, y eso se hace en la academia y se hace en la educación no formal, que muchas instituciones, de una manera, así como hace Curando Caribe, pone en práctica, y que hoy eso es extendido. En América del Sur hay algunas muy connotadas, Lugar a Dudas, Floras, Natura, Teorética lo hacen en Costa Rica. O sea, hay muchísimas prácticas de educación fuera de la escuela que tienen formatos más flexibles donde poder llevar a cabo discusiones profundas e incorporar a mucha gente de diferentes formaciones, de diferentes... y yo creo que en eso tenemos que estar, que eso es una práctica de lucha, eso no es un constante... reconsiderarnos, rehacernos, remirarnos, rediscutirlos, aprovechar las experiencias que ya se han hecho, sacar lo que nos venga bien a nuestras particulares circunstancias, dejar por ahí, dejar en puntos suspensivos aquellos que podemos recuperar. Yo creo que de eso se trata.
Bueno, pensando de esas posibilidades, ¿no? Afuera del museo tradicional. My next question then is for Monica. That has to do with, it was interesting to see the discussion about institutions. Visually, I was focused on three things, right? One was buildings, right? Beautiful, amazing new buildings. What's your institution? This museum is in an old...
It's in a historic building on the waterfront. It's in a historic building in downtown Frederiksted, right on the waterfront, close to where the pier, where the cruise ships come in. But we don't really get many cruise ships in St. Croix.
So we've got buildings. Then you have bodies, right? It seemed like a lot of the interventions had to do with performance, performativity,
Right.
dance, and all that. And then you have programming, right? The content of these things. So I've just been addressing the issue of. I've been looking at the Whitney as an institution, and of course the $420 million building is kind of a thing unto itself, maintaining that structure itself. Forget the content, forget the art and all the curating and all that. It's just the building itself is a monster. So you've got buildings, you've got these bodies, both inside, outside. you have the content that most of us are sort of dealing with. There's an economy involved with that. You mentioned earlier when we were talking about this, this notion of an economy. Was it an economy of reconstruction, or there was some kind of, when we were talking about reparations, crisis maybe? Was it an economy of crisis that you were mentioning before? Do you remember the term?
Disaster capitalism?
Okay. So I'm wondering if you could sort of think about that in terms of, maybe these three sites of, cultural production, the architectural, the performative, and, the sort of content-driven thing that we curate.
I guess one of the things is really to have that space function as an arts incubator and a place for people to come and to organize and to communicate. Really having a space for people to communicate and really build, because as I mentioned, now more than ever we have to keep our eyes open. And this is really the time, I feel like, when all of the realness comes out, all the truth reveals itself, all of the, dark, nasty stuff that's brewing just below the surface kind of comes to a head. And it's very apparent. We're on a small island. That's why the pollution is so evident, because you can see it happening. So it's really apparent to see this happening, and I think to be able to create space for that, one way would be to bring artists and activists together through residencies, which I've done, but to continue that work across disciplines, so that it's not just, because we need help. Maybe it's people that have been through Katrina. Maybe it's people that have been through other disasters that can contribute. At the Art Place Summit that we were at last week, it was great because we met one of the city planners who was using arts and culture to really deal with some of these problems. So I think using that space to create a dialogue, to organize people together so that we can kind of fight back against these issues and organize.
Thanks. And so when we were talking about this, of course, I remembered other crises like 3/11, the tsunami, nuclear disaster in Japan, and how arts were activated very, very clearly, in addition to architectural, immediate kind of emergency housing projects. MIT was very ready to deploy that kind of stuff. But in terms of the arts in Japan, it was interesting that folks were really looking at residency programs and other kinds of things to sort of address the issue. And in many ways, something like social practice has become a very pragmatic thing for addressing social issues. In the US, of course, a lot of funding is sort of geared towards that, to seeing kind of results-driven stuff. So my question next is to Jean, and sort of thinking about the kinds of projects that are very extremely site-specific in terms of like really observing the kind of layers, the palimpsest of occupation and violence in your space or your local site. And that last image, I thought was really one of the last images when you guys are going out. How do you relate the beautiful building to that situation, and how does that the institutional reach kind of how do you mediate that institutional reach out into the other spaces?
Yeah, I mean it's quite difficult. I mean the building is part of a wave of gentrification and a quite a widening in wealth gap that is actually literally diagrammed in the buildings of the city, yeah? So it's you just repurpose it however you can. You have a building, you have certain resources, and you just have to repurpose it for what seems like a proper program. There's no nice way to mediate this. It's like you just take your resources and you do what you think you need to do with them.
But how does that work in terms of like when you're working with an artist who's bringing you out, right, to place?
Yeah.
And I imagine it also involves local communities there, right? How do you present ICA to that site?
Right. So I think one of the things we try to do is, so the image you're talking about, we're in Miccosukee land, and we went out to the Everglades, to the Otter Clan to visit with them. And I think what we try to do is just, you know, not, I mean, we have nothing to offer them. So it's just a space and a set of resources, and, you know, we have, you know, it's not really a dialogue in the sense that we fucked it up, you know? So what are we gonna say? You know, so when, I'm sorry? So when Houston comes, you know, we're there to learn from Houston. We don't really have anything to say to Houston except maybe, sorry, we fucked this up.
And that's enough. I mean, I'm just wondering, like, you know, part of protocols, like, did you observe any kind of social protocols in terms of, did you bring any gifts or things like that, or?
So I think before we went out, we did things in-house, and kind of Houston took us through how we should do this, and we did, you know, just kind of sharing protocols and talking protocols and how you find your turn when you need to speak. So we did some of this before we went out. And then, so that image is kind of the last
Right.
moment of our engagement, and we've done a lot of work in-house before.
Okay, great. So now I want to take a little time to get.
Me recordó la pregunta, el diálogo entre Jean y Mario, un texto que es un texto que a mí, de un autor que yo sigo muchísimo y que me encanta, que es un autor, su nombre es Gerald Raunic, es uno de los grandes productores de pensamiento crítico, de resistencia, desde una formación muy erudita en problemas históricos del arte, y él contaba, por eso me parece interesante a propósito de esto, él contaba de dos artistas soviéticos cuando el tiempo de las repúblicas soviéticas, que uno era Tetriakov y otro era Klusiv, son dos artistas muy importantes de las vanguardias de los años 30, que impulsados por la voluntad de hacer los protocolos comunitarios, etcétera, y salir a las comunidades de los kolhos, a esta misma pregunta, a ver qué le podemos dar, qué nos podemos traer. Y él contaba, ese texto es genial, está en internet, por cierto, cualquiera que después me pregunte, le preguntaba, Tetriakov siguió todos los protocolos que los discursos, digamos, académicos y de acción con la comunidad, de ir a comunicarse con los obreros. Él siguió todas las recomendaciones habidas y por haber de la ética, las preguntas, lo que había que dar, se había que recibir, dar. Klusiv no, Klusiv llegó, pensó, empezó a trabajar, empezó a generar estructuras que cambiaban las relaciones entre las gentes, estructuras creativas, y toda la reflexión del texto está entre esos dos mundos. Bueno, ¿qué hacer? Lo pongo en ejemplo porque me salió de aquí y porque allá también hay prácticas comunitarias que se han hecho la misma pregunta. O sea, vamos a una comunidad y tenemos que salir diciendo, bueno, porque ellos lo que nos están diciendo es, bueno, ¿qué vienen a traernos? ¿Qué vienen a darnos? O sea, porque las comunidades tienen sus propias necesidades, tienen sus propias... Entonces, eso también es un tema que de alguna manera, en toda esta cuestión de la relación instituciones, comunidad, etcétera.
Gracias. ¿Tenemos un micrófono para la audiencia? Okay. ¿Tenía una pregunta aquí? ¿Había una pregunta aquí? Do you have a question?
Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Lucet. Pregunta, yo no entendí muy bien, ¿el museo está o no está?
¿A mí?
Sí.
El museo está.
Ah, ok.
está el museo físico, pero ya no es el proyecto que originalmente presenté. O sea, el museo ahora es un museo en el cual puede venir cualquiera a decir, voy a presentar esto, pongo, como le dije. Lo mismo hay una exposición de moda que una lata de un producto Nestlé que se van a lanzar, depende. Una boda en el lobby puede haber, alquilada por una familia pudiente.
¿Otra pregunta? ¿Comentario? Okay. Bueno, muchísimas gracias. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.